at all. So we'll find out. But we believe in experimenting at Berkshire, and we've got the know-how to write that business direct, and we'll find out if the customer wants to buy it that way. We've got an awfully good insurance business, but the nature of the insurance business has changed. I mean, Geico was all direct mail back in 1936 when Leo Goodwin and his wife sat there and stuffed envelopes. And the basic idea of saving people money on auto insurance continues to this day, but it went from direct mail it went to the TV and the phone, went to cable TV, and it went to the internet and goes to mobile, and the world moves on, and the key is to be able to save people money and give them good service, and whatever way does that in the most effective way is going to be what wins 20 or 30 or 50 years from now, and we'll try to stay on top of it.
What is the one question that you've never been asked that you would like to answer?
Well, I can think of the question I haven't been asked, but I'm not sure I want to answer it now. I think I've been asked almost all of them, and many of them time after time after time. Charlie, do you have anything that you're just dying to be asked?
Well, Ms. Lady will first tell us the worst thing she ever did in her life.
Paulo, I wish we could help you. If you got another question you'd like to throw at us?
I could ask you another question.
Good.
Can I buy you lunch?
I think she's talking to you, Charlie. He always wins. Well, you saw him in the movie. He always gets the girl.
Yeah, I'm so heavily involved with those girls in the movie that I just don't have room on my list.
Thank you, Paul.
Yeah.
Are you actually saying 3G's management method is congruent with yours? Asked another way, if 3G ran Berkshire, would there not be significant layoffs and consolidation among the companies?
No, I think there would be some companies they make changes in, but I would say that Geico, for example, 33,000 employees or whatever the number is run just as efficiently as 3G would run it. I would say our home office with 25 people, we could have a home office with 500 people. We could have floors devoted to strategy and floors devoted to human resources and comparing the salaries of everybody at all our different companies and so on. If they walked into that situation, they'd cut it back. I don't know whether they get it down to the 25 we have, but we do not believe in having extra people around. At our newspapers, unfortunately, they have had to cut back as revenue has kept shrinking. And the idea that you run a fat operation just because you're making a lot of money is, we cut back in our textile business. I closed the Wambeck mill considerably before we closed the Berkshire mills. It only when it became apparent that it was just hopeless, we gave up on it. But in the meantime, every time at Berkshire, I had a drawer full of proposals that said if we put in this kind of a loom, we'll be able to get rid of 8 people. And we put in the loom. I mean, we were trying to reduce our labor complement all the time because we were in competition with people that were doing the same thing. So I don't think there's anything, and we do have some businesses that probably have more people than we need, and I don't do something about it. But I don't encourage it in any way, and most of our managers don't operate that way. And it's true if 3G were running our operations, they would get more active at that than I will. But that doesn't mean that I endorse it. It just means that I basically tolerate it, where I've got a manager that I think, well, I think better of the 3G method of operation than I do of our operators where they really have excess people in it. We've got very few of those, but we do have a few. So I would never advocate running a business at a loss if you where it's going to continue. And you'll see that in our economic principles. It's been in the back of the book, back of the annual report for 30 years or so. And the same goes for having excess people around. And I think you'll see our attitude toward excess people best expressed in our office here that has 25 people, and Charlie's office in Los Angeles that has 2, counting him.
I'd say we got 2/3 of one. We're getting by with practically nothing.
When we look at the body of work that the firm has put together in the consumer staples universe, Anheuser-Busch InBev, Burger King, Tim Hortons, and now Kraft Heinz, one gets the sense that they view the average consumer staples firm as being undermanaged with the potential for substantially greater levels of profitability. Given the ongoing struggles of many packaged food firms, most of which compete in a mature category against private label and or store brand offerings that undercut them in price and diminish the value of their brands, and many of them having to deal with large retailers like Walmart that provide meaningful sales volumes but are also quite demanding and continuously pushing for the lowest price available, do you see the potential for further consolidation in the industry with a firm like Kraft Heinz emerging as a big consolidator? Or do you feel that Nestle's more recent squawking about the deal and 3G Capital's reputation as being a bit heavy-handed with cost-cutting being enough to keep further consolidation at bay?
Well, there will be deals in the future. I mean, they're bound to be. But the strong brands, just look at the ones that General Foods had in the 1980s and the ones that Kraft has now that come from that same company. And I mean, Coca-Cola sold more cases of beverages last year than any year in their history, and they'll sell more this year. I mean, it's a strong brand is really potent stuff. I mean, take Heinz ketchup or something of the sort. It's 60% brand share in the United States, but it's much higher in many other countries. So you'll always have the fight between the retailer and the brand, and the retailer is going to use all the pressure they've got, and therefore the brand has to stand for something in the consumer's mind, because in the end the retailer may want to shift to a house brand, private label, private labels have been around forever in the soft drink field. I mean, I can remember when I was looking at Cott Beverage and all of those and thinking, what will it do to us? I remember when Sam Walton sent me the first six-pack. He told me it was the first six-pack of Sam's Cola 20 years ago. And believe me, Walmart has plenty of power, but so does Coca-Cola. And the brand, you've got to nourish them. You've got to take very, very, very good care of them. They have to stand for the promise that's in people's mind about them. But a lot of people have tried to, I don't know how many dozens or maybe hundreds of cola beverages there have been over the years. RC Cola, they came up with the first diet product back in the early 60s. And that looked like a big maneuver. Wilkinson came up with the blade back in the 60s after Gillette. But Gillette ends up with 70% by dollar value worldwide of razor blades after 100 years. So you've got to protect a brand. You've got to enhance it in every way. You've got to get a promise in people's minds that gets delivered that way. But that's the question Charlie and I faced in 1972 when we looked at See's. See's was selling for $1.95 a pound. Russell Stover was selling a little cheaper. And you had to decide how much damage could a Russell Stover do if they came after See's and they copied our shops and all that sort of thing. If you protect a brand, if you got a terrific brand and you protect it, it's a fabulous asset. But you'll always have trouble dealing with Costco and Walmart and the rest of the guys, Kroger, and you name it. They're tough too. But the great brands will survive and the great retailers will do well. Charlie?
Well, we've almost exhausted this topic. There's no question about the fact that waves of layoffs frighten people. A job is a very important part of a person's life, and it's no small thing to lose it. So, but on the other hand, I don't think what would our country be if we'd kept everybody on the farms? All this prosperous group would be pitching hay and milking cows at 4 a.m. No, we need our businesses to be right-sized.
Do you think value investment can be widely applied in all markets or just for material markets, just as the ones in the United States? Do you have any suggestions for value investors to hold against pressure?
Yeah, I certainly think investment principles do not stop at borders. So if I were investing in China or any place else, India, UK, Germany, I would apply exactly the same sort of principles that I learned from the intelligent investor. I would think of stocks as a small piece of a business. I would think of investment fluctuations being there to benefit me rather than to hurt me. And I would try to focus my attention on businesses that where I thought I understood the competitive advantage they had and what they would look like in 5 or 10 years. So I don't think I would change the principles at all.
Well, the Chinese have a history of being very entrepreneurial and of gambling very heavily when they have the opportunity. And it has created great volatility in the Chinese stock markets. And when things get bouncy and prosperous like our internet craze here in the United States, China looks a lot like Silicon Valley. I think China would do way better to be more value investor minded and less absorbed in waves of speculation. So I think the more China copies the way Berkshire operates, I think the better it'll be for China.
Yeah, there's a certain irony in that we would do the best over decades if we operated in a market where people operated very foolishly. And the more people respond to short-term events and exaggerated things or anything that causes people to get wildly enthusiastic or wildly depressed actually is what allows people to make lots of money in securities. And on the other hand, it's not the greatest thing for a society. And Charlie and I have benefited enormously by the fact that over a 50-year period, there have been a few periods, probably the most extraordinary being 1973 and 74, where you could buy stocks unbelievably cheap, cheaper than happened in 2008 and 2009. And, it doesn't make sense to have that much volatility in the market, but humans behave the way humans behave, and they're going to continue to behave that way in the next 50 years. I mean, if you're a young investor and you can sort of stand back and value stocks as businesses and invest when things are very cheap, no matter what anybody is saying on television or what you're reading, and perhaps, if you wish, sell when people get terribly enthused, it is really not a very tough intellectual game. It's an easy game if you can control your emotions. And as Charlie says, that he thinks we've talked about a little bit that the Chinese market may be more. There may be more speculative influences in it even than in the United States because it's a relatively new development and it may lend itself to greater extremes. And that should produce great opportunities. Charlie?
Yeah, but there are great opportunities for excess and nasty contractions after unnatural booms and so on. I think China is wise to dampen the speculative booms, and I think the Chinese. I don't think the value investing will ever go out of style. Who in the hell doesn't want value when you buy something? How can there be anything else that makes any sense except value investing?
It never gets that popular, though.
People are looking for an easier way,
yeah.
and that's a mistake. It looks easier, but in fact it's harder. And there's a lot of misery to be obtained by misusing stocks.
Yeah. Nobody buys a farm that make a lot of money next week or next month, or they buy it in an apartment house. They buy it based on what they think the long-term future is, and if they make a reasoned calculation of that and the purchase price looks attractive, they buy it, and then they don't get a quote on it every day or every week or every month or even every year. And that's probably a better way to look at stocks.
My question concerns the risk of chemical, nuclear, biological, and cybersecurity problems, and the audience should reflect on the initial letters of those words when I tell you that Mr. Buffett has sometimes dubbed that CNBC. Sorry, Becky.
Well, I just do that to tease people, but
now, wait a minute. One more. How do these threats affect your outlook?
They are the great threat to the United States. We have and will have a wonderful economic system. Your children are going to live better than you do, and your grandchildren are going to live better than they do. And that is there are fits and starts and ups and downs, but just go outside, or as you fly home, just imagine what your flying over looked like in 1776, and everything since then is profit. I mean, the farms are incredibly more productive. The cities have grown. It's all here, and that's all come from unleashing the energies and brains of the American people in a system that has worked quite well despite all the deficiencies that we talk about all the time. So that hasn't been lost at all. And people get upset because we're having 2% growth. Well, 2% growth with 1% population growth means 20% gain in a generation. And 20% on 54,000 of GDP per capita is another 10,000 of GDP per capita coming in the next generation. This country has a wonderful future, but as the questioner pointed out, that can all be nullified by either madmen or rogue states or religious fanatics or sociopaths or whatever it may be who wish to have access to weapons of mass destruction and to nuclear, which is I used to think was the primary one. You can now add biological and chemical and cyber, and there will be an increasing number. There already are a huge number of people that would wish harm, and particularly on the United States, although on others as well. And those people aren't going to go away, and they're going to look for more ingenious ways of utilizing the raw materials that they have or might get access to, and better delivery systems. And we need an extremely vigilant security operation in the United States, and we will have threats. I do a little bit about those things in a few ways, but that's something we live with. But we also live in a country that is going to do extraordinarily well, and if we successfully ward off those threats, or at least minimize their impact on us, I still maintain that the luckiest person ever born in history on a probabilistic basis is the baby being born in the United States today. Charlie?
Well, of course, we were a favored place, and we've had a favored outcome, and we've been lucky too. I think I probably lived in the most ideal era that any man in human history could have been born into. I think you too. You have too, Warren.
Right.
But I don't think we should get too smug. China has come up a lot faster than any other big nation ever came up. And
but that's good for us.
Well, I think I can hardly think of anything more important than future close collaboration between the United States and China. And you're talking about the two most important nations in the world going forward. And I think it is very important that we like and trust one another and have very good relations and work together to avoid bad consequences that come from other people's mistakes and misbehavior. So I think both China and the United States would be crazy not to collaborate and increase trust. I don't think there's anything more important that we could do for our respective safety and for the general benefit of the world.
If you had your choice, would you rather be being born now with all the qualities you've got, or when you were born?
Well, I must say it's very interesting now, but it was all. I think that's too tough a question. I don't like these very theoretical questions. I'd rather think about something where I might gain some advantage or help somebody else to gain an advantage.
Berkshire has been successfully managed for 50 years by a chairman and vice chairman whose principal experience was in allocating capital amongst a number of businesses and industries with which they were familiar and whose attributes they could compare. Since capital allocation is the key skill needed for a company structured the way Berkshire is, why couldn't the company's principal decision maker in the future also be someone who is experienced in choosing among different reinvestment options, with perhaps a second outstanding person expert in operations acting as chief operating officer, albeit a relatively hands-off one given Berkshire's extreme decentralization?
Well, that's a very good question. It's not inconceivable. It's very unlikely, Johnny, that, but as you say, a chief investment officer will have or should have a significant array of skills that would be useful also for a chief executive officer. But I would say also that I would not want to move, if I were voting on it, I would not want to vote to put somebody whose sole experience had been investments in charge of an operation like Berkshire, who had not had any also significant operating experience. And I've said that I'm a better investment manager because I've been an operating manager, and I'm a better operating manager because I've been the investment manager. But operations, I've learned a lot through operations that I wouldn't have learned if I'd stayed in investments all my life. I would not have been equipped to run it. I learned a lot of things about operations by being in operations. So if you had somebody that had the dual experience and was very good at investments, but it had a lot of experience in operations, that would be conceivable. Otherwise, I wouldn't vote that way. Charlie?
Well, every year at Berkshire is now constituted, the owned and controlled businesses get more and more important, and the marketable securities are relatively less important. So I think it would be crazy not to go with the tide to some extent. And we need more. We need expertise beyond that of a typical portfolio analyst.
Yeah. But the CEO should have some real understanding of investments and investment alternatives and all of that. And I've seen a lot of businesses run by people that really don't understand the math of investing or capital allocation very well. So having a dual background is useful, but actually our operating managers know, some of them know a lot about investing.
Question is regarding Ted Weschler. Can you please share your views regarding his investment philosophy, his investment process, and the qualities that he brings to Berkshire?
Yeah, both Ted and Todd, the two investment managers, aside from myself, at Berkshire, are very, very smart about businesses and investments. I mean, they understand the reality of business operations. They understand what makes for competitive strength and all of the things that you'd learn in business school or learn through investing. And on top of that, they have qualities of character which are terribly important to me and Charlie. We have seen dozens and dozens and dozens of investment managers with great records over the years. We used to drop in and see some of those guys, that were running. I'm talking back in the 1960s and 70s. And when I gave up my partnership, I knew probably 20 people with great records from the previous 6 or 8 years. But I picked Bill Ruane to handle the funds of my partners going forward. And he set up a fund called Sequoia Fund, and 10,000 put in that fund has become over $4 million now. Well, Bill was a terrific investment manager, but he was a terrific human being. And we really want people where they do more than their share, where they don't claim credit for things they don't do, where they just every aspect of their personality is such that you want to be around them and you want to hand responsibility over to them. And Ted and Todd fit that bill, and there's plenty of investment managers in Wall Street with great records that don't fit that bill in our view. So that's about all I can tell you. Charlie met Todd first, I met Ted first, and we both, when we talked about them, we talked about their record and the kind of stocks they own, but we talked a whole lot more about what kind of people they were, and we haven't been disappointed. Charlie?
Yeah, I think the whole thing is working pretty well, and I think those people will be constructive around Berkshire for reasons apart from their expertise in handling securities. In fact, they already are.
They already very well.
They have just each one has helped buy a business recently.
Yeah, and they will help oversee it too, the businesses, and they're smart about business, and they know just exactly they know the right touch to apply in terms of how much they get involved. I mean, Todd worked on charter brokerage. He worked on an acquisition we made from Phillips. Ted just worked on this operation over in Germany. Went over there a couple of times, and he's just smart. He's got good sense. He knows how to deal with people. If a deal is to be made, he'll get it made. And Charlie and I have run into more dysfunctional people with 160 IQs probably than anybody alive. But Solomon gave us a head start on that, as a matter of fact. Wouldn't you say that?
We've specialized in it.
Yeah.
We have absolutely specialized in it.
Yeah. We have seen, take the Solomon. We have seen a group of people whose IQs far surpass those of the people of Berkshire, and we've seen them self-destruct to make money they didn't need when they were already rich. See, that's madness. But a lot of people are just incapable of functioning well day after day, even though they're capable of brilliance from time to time. And we've got very solid people in Ted and Todd. They're very bright, and they identify with Berkshire and not with themselves, and it's a huge factor over time. Any more, Charlie, on that?
Well, yeah, and the trustworthiness is more important than the brains. Not that they don't have the brains, but we wouldn't hire anybody, no matter how able, if we didn't trust them.
Yeah, very occasionally. Yeah, we'll get disappointed on that occasionally, but not very often. We're approaching noon. We'll come back at 1. I promised 7 years ago I made this bet, which was originally to produce $1 million for the charity of the winner. And another fellow who was in the hedge fund business. I offered this bet to anybody. Only one person took me up on it. And we made this bet where $1 million goes to the winner's charity as to whether a group of 5 hedge funds of funds would beat the S&P Vanguard fund. And my point being that the fees would not be overcome by managerial brilliance, and that the hedge funds would fall short, and the other fellow betting essentially that paying people 2 and 20 and having an override for the fund of funds was nothing to pay for the brilliance of getting Wall Street to manage your money. And I promised that every year I would report the update. And the first year I fell far behind, but we reported it then. So we'll put that slide up. And as you can see, 7 years into it, it's interesting that just buying Vanguard fund, with nothing but putting the S&P 500 in there, is now given a cumulative return of 63.5%, and the hedge funds are at 19%. The interesting thing is, some of that is underperformance, but the hedge fund managers have done very well during that period. If they were managing $1 billion, for example, at 2 and 20, you get $20 million a year just for coming to the office. the hedge funds haven't done bad. The investors in the hedge funds have paid a very big price. And we originally funded this with zero coupon bonds. We each bought about 350,000 of zero coupon bonds that would be worth 500,000 at the end of the period. We converted it to Berkshire Hathaway stock. So a few years ago, the fellow on the other side of the bet did it with me. And so it now looks like the winner will get appreciably more than $1 million. And if you want to entertain yourself, you can go to long bets on search. Just put in long bets, and you'll find this organization out in Washington that sort of acts as the stakeholder, sets the rules for these long bets. And now there's hundreds of them up there, and they're on all kinds of predictions. And you can go there, and if you want to disagree with one of the parties on there, you can make these bets that pay off in 50 years or 25 years. It's kind of an interesting site to visit, and people give their arguments on both sides. And so if you don't have anything better to do with your time, go to long bets. I want to clear up one thing. My daughter told me that because I had all those slides that were in answer to Carol's first question that Carol and I had discussed it ahead of time. I will guarantee you that I've discussed no questions with anyone on the panel, and they will tell you the same thing. But I knew I was going to be asked questions about Clayton, so I had prepared the slides. It was an accident. It turned out to be the first question, but it was certain to be in the first few. So Carol Carol in 60 years has never tipped me off on anything, nor have the other panelists, and everything. But I was prepared for the fact that people would be asking questions about Clayton.
Which of Berkshire's businesses are best suited to thrive during a period of high inflation, and why? Which will suffer the most, and why?
The best businesses during inflation are usually the best. They're the businesses that you buy once, and then you don't have to keep making capital investments subsequently. So you do not face the problem of continuous reinvestment involving greater and greater dollars because of inflation. That's one reason real estate in general is good during inflation. If you built your own house 55 years ago like Charlie did, or bought one 55 years ago like I did, it's a one-time outlay. Whereas if you get an inflationary expansion in replacement capital without having to replace yourself. And if you've got something that's useful to someone else, it tends to be priced in terms of replacement value over time. So you really get the inflationary kick. Now, if you're in a business such as the utility business or the railroad business, it just keeps eating up more and more money, and your depreciation charges are inadequate, and you're kidding yourself as to your real economic profits. So any business with heavy capital investment tends to be a poor business to be in inflation, and often it's a poor business to be in generally. And the business where you buy something once, a brand is a wonderful thing to own during inflation. See's Candy built their brand many years ago. Now we've had to nourish it as we've gone along, but the value of that brand increases during inflation, just as the value of really any strongly branded goods. Gillette bought the entire radio rights to the World Series in 1939. And as I remember, it cost them $100,000, and for that they got to broadcast the Yankees, I think, versus the Reds in 1939. And think of the number of impressions they made on minds in 1939 for $100,000, and they were getting into the minds of young guys like myself. I was 8 or 9, and millions of people, and they did it in those dollars then. And of course, if you were going to go out and try and have a similar impressions on millions of minds now, it costs a fortune. And part of that's due to inflation, part of it's due to other things. But it was a great investment which could be made in 1939 dollars that paid off in terms of selling razors and blades in 1960 and 1970 and 1980 dollars. So that's the kind of business you want to own. Charlie?
Well, yeah, but if the inflation ever goes completely out of control, you have no idea how it's going to end up. If it weren't for the Weimar inflation, we might never have had Adolf Hitler. It was the twosome of the great German inflation followed by the Great Depression that brought us Hitler. And think of the price that the world paid for that one. We don't want inflation because it's good for See's candy.
No, I didn't quite realize I was proposing that.
I wasn't criticizing it.
What's good for See's candy is good for the United States.
Taking over or buying or acquiring a large company, or is Berkshire Specialty doing well enough that you're content with that organic growth?
I would say that it's almost certain that I don't want to say 100% certain, but it's almost certain we will not take over a large commercial insurance company. We've got the ideal operation, in my view, in Berkshire Hathaway Specialty. We've got the right people running it. We've got Ajit overseeing it. We've got more capital than any commercial insurance company in the world, so that our security and therefore our policies are really better than anyone else's. So we've got all these things going for us, and if we bought a big operation, we'd have paid a very substantial non-deductible acquisition premium. And this way, we've actually made money while we're in the building stage, and I think that it can be a very, very big operation 5 or 10 years from now. So it's almost zero probability that we'll buy somebody else. Charlie?
Well, I certainly agree with you.
Okay. That's how he keeps his job. We'll go to, incidentally, all the overflow rooms, including at the Hilton, got filled. I'm not sure where Station 11 is, but we always lose a fair number at lunchtime. So now I'm sure everybody can find a seat, but we do apologize to those who could not find a seat this morning. Station 11.
Yes. Hey, Warren and Charlie. How are you guys? Congratulations on 50 years.
Thank you.
So in this year's annual letter, Charlie wrote about the peculiar attributes that made the Berkshire system and the leader of the system a historically organizational entity. So my question to both of you is, what practical mental model or mental models would you impress upon a young, enterprising individual at the infancy of their career to build an important, enduring enterprise of that particular distinction and impact? And if you could give maybe some contrasting examples, like why is it Microsoft able to build itself into a dominating monolithic company versus a See's Candy, which can be a great enterprise to spin off cash flow, but not necessarily be an enduring, or not necessarily enduring, but an impactful enterprise to the level of a Berkshire or a Microsoft?
Thank you, Warren.
You're the guy that wrote it. This is pineapple juice, incidentally. People were questioning that. They say it's good for your throat if you're going to talk a long time.
Yes, well, of course, reputation you get over a long period of time. Very few people are like Charles Lindbergh, where you just suddenly have a great reputation. Most of us have to acquire one very slowly, and that was true in Berkshire's case. And in any individual, you just have to get the best reputation you can in the years you're allotted and the time available. And it may work out well, it may work out poorly, but it's a wise investment. I see all the time opportunities come to people where it's the credibility they've gotten in the past that causes them to have the new opportunity. So I think hardly anything is more important than behaving well as you go through life. And I think we actually try to behave better as we got more prosperous. And I think you'd be crazy if you didn't. So I certainly recommend that you follow those old-fashioned principles. And I don't think there's any way of guaranteeing a total powerhouse brand, nor can, if a result is a 1 in 50 million type result, you're probably not going to get them.
Johnny Agnelli of Fiat, back in, I think it was 1988, I was at dinner with him one time, and he said something to me that stuck with me. He said, when you get old, he says, you'll have the reputation you deserve. He said, he said, for a while you can fool people, but he says, when he was talking about himself at the time, but he said, when you get to be my age, he says, whatever reputation you have, it's probably the one you deserve. And I think the same is true of companies. And frankly, it has helped Berkshire a whole lot, that it has gotten a reputation to be a somewhat different sort of company. I mean, I don't think we set out to do that exactly, but it has worked out that way.
You have said that global warming has not increased Berkshire's payouts for weather-related events. Yet other insurers, including Travelers, have cited climate change as a risk factor.
I've seen of course, the SEC requires you to put in all these risk factors, and the lawyers will tell you to put in, everything possibly you can think of, that you'll develop Alzheimer's or whatever it may be. I mean, they just want you to have a laundry list so that it's all been covered in case of later litigation or something of the sort. So people do put in weather risk, and maybe they put it in because they've got some model that shows it, but we price our business, basically we price it every year. It's not like a life insurance company. A life insurance company, you make a contract at so much 1,000, and if you buy whole life insurance, that you've set a price for, if you're 20, you may have set a price for 60 or 70 years in the future. But that is not the property casualty insurance business which we're in. We set it 1 year at a time, and I see nothing that tells me that on a yearly basis that global warming is something that should cause me to change my prices a lot, or even a small amount. That doesn't mean that it isn't a threat to humanity or and terribly important. It just means that if I'm going to sell a 1-year insurance policy and I'm going to sell it on a $1 billion plant, I may care enormously about the fire protection and various other kinds of protection within that plant. I may care about what's going on adjacent to that plant and all kinds of things. But I am not thinking about global warming. It does not change the situation in a material way in any 1-year period of time, in my judgment. And if I was writing a 50-year windstorm policy in Florida, I would think very hard about what global warming might do in that case to the incidence and the intensity of potential hurricanes. But I do not think it has any material effect on the likelihood of or the intensity of a hurricane in Florida or Louisiana or Texas or next year. So it is not it's not something I would put in the 10K as a threat. Charlie?
Yeah, I don't think it's totally clear what the effects of global warming will be on extremes of weather. I think there's a lot of guesswork in that field, and a lot of people like howling about calamities that are by no means sure.
Yeah, do you think, would it change your 1-year prediction as to what the rate should be?
No.
No, it wouldn't change mine either. So I don't really understand why they put that in there.
A lot of people get very invested in it. It's like a crazy ideology. It's not that global warming isn't happening. It's just that you can get so excited about it, you make all kinds of crazy extrapolations that aren't necessarily correct.
Yeah, look at it this way, Andrew. Would you change the rate for tomorrow? on insurance because from the rate today for global warming. I doubt it very much. Now, would you change it for 50 years? Might very well. But I think that 1 year is much closer to one day than it is to 50 years in terms of focusing on that factor. So I do not want our underwriters to sit there thinking a lot about, in terms of writing a risk or at the price at which to write that risk. I do not want them thinking about global warming. I want them thinking about whether there's a moral risk involved and who owns the property. That can be very significant. There used to be one fellow called Marvin the Torch that if you insured Marvin the Torch, global warming didn't really make much difference. His building was going to go. But Marvin had a marvelous way of looking at it, though. He said, I don't burn buildings, I create vacant lots.
ConocoPhillips and ExxonMobil. In the first instance, he bought shares near the height of the spike in oil prices in 2008, later acknowledging that this was a mistake given how dramatically oil prices fell during the crisis. While he'd been able to swap some of those holdings post the spinoff of Phillips 66 into operating assets, most of what he sold the last 6 years, by our estimates, has been at a loss. With that in mind, and given the track record that Greg Abel and his team at Berkshire Hathaway Energy have had acquiring and investing in energy assets, does it make more sense to leave future energy-related investments in their hands?
Well, there's nothing we like better than to back up Greg in buying utility properties. But we call it energy, but it's not oil and gas in Berkshire Hathaway Energy. And they're really in a dramatically different business than ConocoPhillips or ExxonMobil. But we are looking constantly for opportunities for Berkshire Hathaway Energy to spend big money, and it will. Berkshire Hathaway Energy, we paid $35.05 per share in 1999 to buy the stock. I was at $35, and I don't change my prices. And Berkshire and the company was then called Mid-American. They hired some investment bankers to come out from New York, and the investment bankers spent a week here doing nothing. But they felt, before they went home, they said that, you got to give us something because we're going to send a big bill. And I said, well, in that case, we'll pay $35.05, and you can say you got the last nickel out of me. But so my ambition ever since has been to have Berkshire Hathaway Energy earn $35.05 per share. It's never paid a dividend. It will probably earn about $30 a share this year, which is a great tribute to Greg and his management. But we will get the 35 or better because he will make some good deals. It's not at all analogous to the ConocoPhillips or ExxonMobil investments. As it turned out, we wrote ConocoPhillips down because we were required by the auditors to do it. We actually, by the time we got all through, we made some money in it, and we made a little money in ExxonMobil too. But we will not be buying very often oil and gas stocks, but we will. We probably haven't bought the last one. And in the end, we look at the cash, we look at available opportunities, both in investments and businesses, and we make decisions occasionally on buying something, and sometimes we change our mind. And that'll continue that way. It's been going on that way for a lot of years, and we have not distinguished ourselves at all in the oil and gas field, although we've made a little money, and we passed up one or two where we could have made a lot of money. Charlie?
Yeah, and with interest rates being so low and the dividend on ExxonMobil being as high as it was not a bad cash substitute if you think only in those terms.
Yeah, it worked out okay. There were other things we could have done that were a lot better, but that's always been true, and it'll continue to be true.
What can be done to effect real change to bring about a simpler, more rational tax code? Thank you.
Well, it takes 218 members of the House of Representatives and 51 U.S. senators and a president that will sign the bill. The question is how much you think the country should spend, and then from whom do you get it? And I would point out that despite the tax rates that all the corporate chieftains complain about the share of earnings, share of GDP accounted for by corporate profits is at a record. Corporate taxes 40 years ago were 4% of GDP. They're now running about 2%. They've decreased significantly while payroll taxes have increased. It's a real question. Decide, and once you get special provisions in the code, it is really hard to get rid of them absent a major revision of the code. I actually think, I may be an optimist on this, but I think both Ron Wyden and Orrin Hatch, the two members of the ranking members, Senate Finance Committee, I think they're capable of working out something that neither one of them likes, but they both like it better than what exists now, and I think it can be made considerably more rational. But in the end, if we're going to spend 21 or 2% of GDP, we should probably raise 19% of GDP. We can take a gap of a couple percent without getting further into debt as a proportion of GDP than we are. So we've got that leeway. But you take 19% of 17.5 trillion or thereabouts, and you're talking, as Senator Dirksen said one time, real money. And how much you get from corporations, how much you get from individuals, how much you get from estate taxes, it's a fight up and down the line. And in terms of the cash abroad,